Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the state of New Jersey, and we'll be focusing on this state's gubernatorial election, which is quickly becoming very, very interesting. Now, it's been a little over a month since I've talked specifically about Virginia or New Jersey, as those are the two races for governor we have coming up this November, which is a little over just a month away. And since we've talked about New Jersey last, I think that there's been a bit of movement in this race, and it's been clearly in the direction of Republican Jack Ciattarelli. Now, to just give some background, obviously we've talked about New Jersey before, but we want to make this clear for everybody watching. This is a seat held by Democrat Phil Murphy, who's the current governor. He is term limited, so Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill is the Democratic nominee. Republicans are running Jack Ciattarelli, who's a former state legislator who was the Republican nominee in 2021 and put up a very respectable performance against Phil Murphy, losing by around 3% of the vote. So we've got a couple interesting dynamics at play here that kind of are characterizing this race. The first thing is that, right, New Jersey, it trended right a lot in 2024. Kamala Harris did a full 10% worse than Joe Biden here, which means that Republicans have some momentum at their back. Furthermore, and I think this is a bigger issue for Democrats, the state party is not very popular right now. And we saw this in states like California and New York as well, where in states that are deep blue, Democrats lost the most support. They only lost a little bit, they lost, right, like 7 to 8% of support in, say, California between 2020 and 2024. In Wisconsin, it was only about 1.5 or about 2%. So in swing states, it was a lot closer. But in deep blue states, Democrats did a lot worse. And New Jersey was obviously kind of the best example of that you could find. It was a 10% shift towards Donald Trump, and Donald Trump came within 6% of winning the state, roughly. So overall, those two things have kind of made Republicans interested in this race just fundamentally kind of from the get-go. But obviously, Democrats have the advantage of not being in the White House. And as we know, in off-year elections, the party out of power generally does a lot better because they have a better turnout rate than the party in power, and because they often do well with persuasion because most voters are kind of tired of the party in power and they want to, kick kind of a check on that. We saw that in most midterm elections in 2022. That wasn't really the case, but I'd argue that that was kind of as a reaction to the Dobbs decision, as well as a really bad slate of Republican candidates in a lot of swing states just for pure electability. But nonetheless, even in 2022, with all those factors benefiting Democrats, they still lost control of the U.S. House of Representatives by a couple of seats. So that pattern still kind of stays relevant here. Now, when we talk about this race, initially, and when I say initially, I'm talking maybe, in May or June, it seemed as though Mikey Sherrod was kind of running away with it. And we can look at all of the polling data. We can start in May. We had some interesting kind of different results here, but the first nonpartisan poll on the New York Times website did have Sherrod up by over 20%. That was obviously a little bit, doubtful. But even in mid to late June, we saw Sherrod, even in Republican polls, is up by 7%, up by 5%. In nonpartisan polls, right, she was up by 10, 6, 8. So she was up by kind of high single digits, even in some Republican internal polls. And then we've gotten a bit of a shift towards Ciattarelli. Now, I think the thing that really initiated this shift was maybe in part the debate, where the consensus was that Ciattarelli was the winner over Sherrod. I will admit I did not watch the entirety of that debate. Obviously, what I always do is whenever I provide analysis or commentary on a political event, right, like this, I will read a bunch of stuff. I read at least five or six, 6 or 7. Please don't make a joke. Articles about that debate, and then I also read what both campaigns were saying about it. I thought, and I obviously saw parts of it, I thought that Ciattarelli won that debate. Now, the flip side of that is that, of course, most people in states, especially swing voters who aren't super partisan, probably aren't watching the debate for governor, right? And so the impact of that, like on its own, kind of like in a vacuum, isn't very big. It won't sway many people. What it will do, it maybe, is draw national attention, which can help with fundraising, and maybe kind of bring some momentum or inspire some confidence to the candidate that needs it. And Ciattarelli, who's been an underdog in this race for months now, needed that, and I think he kind of got it, just with better media coverage and kind of better, I would say better maybe perception of the campaign he's running from national Republicans. And then when you couple that with the fact that Republicans seem to be getting beat pretty badly down in Virginia, where Spanberger has maintained a pretty solid lead over Winsome Earl Sears, you're kind of in a spot where, okay, the Republicans have had a year since the election to raise money. Where are they going to spend that money? A good chunk of it should be spent in New Jersey, where it seems as though they do have a better shot pretty unambiguously than in Virginia. And so we've also seen, as a result of, I think, those two factors, movement in the polls towards Jack Ciattarelli. Now, we got a poll that had Ciattarelli up by 1. This was from his campaign, but nonetheless significant because his other campaigns, right, or his other polls from his campaign, earlier in the month he was down by 3, and then in these other, Republican polls in June, he was down by 5 and 7. And now he's up by 1, 46% for him, 45% for Cheryl. And then we've also got some, nonpartisan polls like Emerson, which is, a pretty well-known national pollster. They have an even race here. A lot of undecided voters, maybe, more of them are Democrats. I read the poll. It's more Kamala Harris voters are undecided than Trump voters. But still, that shows, right, like there are some people who even voted for Kamala Harris who did not vote or who are not sure if they're going to support Mikey Cheryl. And then you also have other polls, right, like, this Valker poll, which is, it's not characterized as being partisan, although it's less known than Emerson. Cheryl's up by 2. And then today what we got, and this is really interesting, we got a poll today for Mikey Cheryl, or excuse me, this is yesterday night, for Mikey Cheryl, that showed that she was only up by 7. And now, right, like, Cheryl up by 7 in a nonpartisan poll might be good for her, but this is her own campaign. She conducted this poll, and I think kind of in response to Ciattarelli, who's been putting out polls that show him ahead, right? Like, this is the first Democratic or Cheryl-aligned internal poll since May. And even then, this was a Democratic PAC, I think. This is Cheryl's campaign. And so, if just being real, like, if that's the best they could find, that she's up by 7 statewide, maybe not great, especially when this is a state that Harris won by 6, right? She's only doing a point better than Harris. And she is running in a year that should be favorable nationally for Democrats, just based on the political environment. So overall, what we're kind of looking at is a situation where the lead has tightened a lot. I think Cheryl's still favored here over Ciattarelli, but it's a race that's closer than it was even a month ago, especially, or even compared to the beginning of the summer, especially. And so I've already talked a little bit about the biggest factor here, which I think is that Democrats in New Jersey, as well as in other states like New York and California, are not super popular. Just they're not perceived as being good at governance, which is a big issue for the party, especially in like the bluest parts of the blue states, right? Like look at San Francisco and Los Angeles or New York City. Deep blue cities still voted for Kamala Harris by a lot, but by less than they did for Biden in 2020. And there were pretty big swings across those cities. And so New Jersey, you saw a similar thing in Newark, which is the biggest, kind of bastion of Democratic votes here. Hudson County and Essex County were pretty bad for Kamala Harris. They swung a lot towards Trump. And so what I think is happening here is that Democrats are already unpopular statewide. Trump might be unpopular in New Jersey too, but that hasn't really been as big of an issue in this race. And so instead what you're getting is a situation where with the salience of Trump going down and the unpopularity of Democrats still being a lot more relevant in the eyes of voters, you get a situation where Democrats, led by Mikey Cheryl, have to be on the defensive, even though they really shouldn't be, even though they're not the ones in power nationally. And so with Democrats on the defensive, they have to have an answer. And I don't think that they have an answer. That's what I think. Like, this is just like my view of this campaign as someone who follows this race pretty closely, right? I'm pretty politically engaged. Obviously, I'm not, like the perfect. That's why I don't endorse candidates on this channel, because it's not my place. But like, I'm pretty politically engaged, and I can't find a message from Cheryl. And I'm not saying this to talk about how great of a political citizen I am. I'm saying it because if I can't find a message from Mikey Cheryl, the average voter who isn't as partisan as me, who isn't as who isn't making election forecasting videos on YouTube, is probably also going to have a harder time finding that message. So when you don't have a coherent message, it's hard to gain momentum. Whereas Ciattarelli, I think, does have a message, which is that it's unaffordable to live in New Jersey, taxes are too high, and Republicans deserve a chance to govern. And obviously, that's a message you can disagree with, you can agree with, but it's coherent and it makes sense. And Cheryl doesn't have that. And so I think that's part of why we're having this movement in the polls, because it's post-Labor Day, more people are tuning in, and they're not hearing what they need to hear from Democrats, who they already are a little distrustful of. And so that's why I think we're getting some voters who did vote for Kamala Harris last year, maybe a little begrudgingly, perhaps, maybe just to oppose Trump, perhaps, but Kamala Harris voters who are saying, I don't know if I'm going to vote for Mikey Cheryl because this is a local race, I'm not really considering Trump in my vote, and I don't have a message from her. And so until that changes, I think it's going to be hard to see Democrats running away with this race the way that they could be, in the way that they might be doing in Virginia, which is going a lot better for them. So those are my thoughts on this race. I think I'm interested to see more polling data. I think we're gonna start getting some more. We've gotten a ton of like New York City mayoral polls, and those are great. But I want to get more New Jersey polls because we just don't have enough. We've only gotten a couple more in the past week, so we're gonna wait and see, and we're gonna check back on this race in just a couple of weeks, as it is going to be as it is October now. So please comment down below what you think, who you support, and if you agree that this race is going to be interesting to watch in November. I think it will be. I think we're getting some really interesting sides out of New Jersey. We're going to keep watching. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.